Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So if you're online, you already know exactly what I'm kind of talking about with just the title alone. So I really want to talk about how the burnout with relationships and romance is such a real thing, even when you're still single. And you watching this video might be single and might feel like you don't even want to waste your time attempting to even get back into the dating scene because you feel this burnout that may have come from one of your own relationships that you recently got out of, or just from what you keep seeing online. And it makes it feel like you yourself just got out of a horrible relationship and you're looking at all these options and you're like, this is horrendous. The reason I really want to talk about this is because this was a feeling I had for a really long time. So I was the type of person who, anytime I did get out of a relationship, I stayed single for a very long time. Like, I'm talking like minimum 3-ish years. And me and my partner were actually talking about this, and it's crazy how people talk about what romance should be like online. And when I see that stuff, I'm like, this is partially why I was so scared to give anybody a chance, because I would see these things and I'm like, okay, if all men think like this, the stuff that we see on social media, how am I ever going to meet anybody who actually wants to create genuine connections and that is not just like a big fat giant cheater? And then on the girl side of it, when I hear girls talking about how they're so burnt out and they tell these stories that are really like traumatizing, and they talk about how they were blindsided, it just put this fear into me that I could not explain. I was like, oh my gosh, if they were blindsided, I'm gonna be blindsided, because I'm an extremely trusting person. So I am not like a snooper, like I'm not like a give me your password, I'm not like a who are you following online. Like, I am naturally a very trusting person. So I was like, if these girls are getting blindsided, like, what's gonna happen to me? But then I kind of started to realize these people on social media were not actually telling their full stories. And I had this crazy, immense, strong fear because I was listening to people tell stories from more of like a tea and like a, oh, if it like a fear-mongering perspective, like, oh, if it happened to me, it's definitely gonna happen to you. But when they actually sort of started to tell their stories, it was weird, because I started to be like, hold on a second. I could count like 12 red flags that you just listed off, but you're still saying that you were blindsided. So when I started to realize that a lot of people on social media will say things to kind of sound like a victim, is sort of how I started to overcome that fatigue that came with even just the idea of dating, or I started to kind of overcome that fear, right? And then when I started to realize that a lot of these men who were talking very angrily, they would tend to focus on specific type of girls who are very obviously into that like Miami girl lifestyle, you know what I mean. But if you don't, then it's like very much like that, very just like party girl, use him for his money, you know, that kind of thing. So I was feeling all this weight and all this stress, and when I took myself away from that, I realized, oh my gosh, like, these people online are so good at implementing this irrational fear inside of us, and so good at making us think that everybody from the opposite gender is just out to get you no matter what. Girls are all just gold diggers and men are all cheaters. That type of content really messed with my head for such a long time, and I'm sure it messes with so many other people's heads. So many people are like on a romance strike, and I don't blame them, because when you hear these things and you're not really always thinking about like what the other side of the story was, like when your friend is explaining something to you, you're thinking about their story from their perspective. And it's kind of the same thing on social media. When somebody is telling you their story, you're thinking about their story from their perspective. So we naturally have this inclination to think, if this is happening to somebody, especially if you find that person attractive, you're going to think, well, that person online telling this story is more attractive than I am. That's not true, but people tend to think that. And they're like, if that happened to this person, what's going to happen to me? And we don't realize that when we say that, we're subconsciously putting ourselves down and telling ourselves that somebody online who is sharing their story that might have been a really disappointing story is more deserving of real love than you yourself. And that's not healthy, right? And that's part of what kind of feeds into that fatigue, because when you start to see all these really attractive people getting cheated on or just not having happy relationships in general, you start to think, well, what about me? You start to think, I'm not as good as that person. And that, I feel like, is the worst part of the fatigue and the burnout, because you really kind of dump down on yourself. And not only do you dump down on yourself, you start to dump down on everybody else. You start to think that everybody is just out to get you. You start to think that people are not people anymore. And that's also too where I think dehumanization always plays a part in this. I think that when it comes to bad relationships, dehumanization is the number one cause, because if you're selfish, you're not going to give a crap how you make the person that you're in a relationship feel. You're not going to care about any consequences. You're just going to think about what suits your needs right then in the moment. And that's just a selfish person. Why did we start turning it into this crazy gender war, right? Like, the gender war, I think, is the root cause of the dating burnout. It's the belief that your gender is good and the other gender is the enemy. And that gets you into situations where you are looking for problems with the other gender. You're not even looking to build authentic, genuine connections, because all you're thinking about is, how is this person going to hurt me? And when you're waiting for somebody to hurt you, you're going to manifest that, I think. You start to think of even innocent actions that might be a mistake or something like that. You're going to think that that was intentional to hurt you. And all this isn't to say that people should not be sharing their stories on social media. They absolutely should be. But I think if we're being honest with ourselves, we can really look and say, people as a whole do not like accountability. Most people would rather just put the blame elsewhere and say things like they were blindsided or all women want to use you for your money, but they don't want to think about, okay, well, what maybe did you miss? Did you miss a lot of red flags? Because if you were willing to acknowledge those red flags, maybe you would not have been blindsided. Or maybe if you were not a douchebag and just flaunting your money, maybe girls wouldn't want to use you for your money. So that's my issue too with the way people kind of get online and really fearmonger and tell people these really hurtful stuff that makes it feel like you're going through that heartbreak on your own. I want you to honestly think about how many friends you've had of the same gender that you've lost. Now, when you think about all those friends that you've lost, do you now think that everybody within your gender is this walking, talking problem? No, you don't. You are willing to acknowledge that, hey, that specific person had all these toxic issues and was not a good friend. Therefore, you are not wanting to be friends with them. But you don't really have an issue meeting other people and making other friends. Why don't we think about romantic relationships the same? I understand that we invest a lot more in romantic relationships, but what we have to realize is what you're investing into a friendship is kind of, it's like the same deal. You know what I mean? We can separate one guy who's a piece of shit or one girl who sucks to the rest of them. And now that you've given those friendships that you lost and were able to kind of cope with them well enough, some thought, I want you to think about every single first date that you've ever been on. So part of the reason why I think that people just get so down in the dumps when something doesn't work out is because of the expectation that we put on somebody when we're going on a date with them. When we go out on a date, we don't even think about how we're just discovering somebody. This might work out, this might not. We're just getting to know somebody. I feel like here, I noticed that people put so much thought into the fact that they're meeting somebody who is hopefully going to be somebody that they spend the rest of their life with. At least that's like the people that I know. If you guys notice anything different, then maybe this doesn't apply. But what I notice is I feel like people put such an emphasis on it and there's such high expectations. So that way, when there is time spent together and things don't work out, people just go crazy. And I think that's where burnout really really stems from. It's the expectation that you set on that person, where when it's a friend, your expectations are not very high. Our expectations on friends get higher as we get to know them, but like when it comes to a romantic encounter, it's like through the roof when you are just going on the first date. And that's why too, I think people who have really, really intensive expectations for a very first date, they also have this burnout. I feel like a lot of them kind of pretend not to, because they're just like, oh, I don't care, next one, next one. But what ends up happening is a lot of them are not making real connections. They're just kind of going for somebody who has money, and that's fine. So if you don't feel like, oh, building a connection is an important thing to me, I'm just here for the money, your burnout may be different, because your burnout might come from the fact of, hey, I keep going on these dates, but like with these people with money and nothing is sticking. That part is probably because they're getting the sense that you don't care to establish any type of connection with them. And the thing is I understand the exhaustion when it comes to building those connections because of all the reasons that I said earlier. It is tiring hearing nothing but horror stories. It is tiring when you're thinking about your own experience and you yourself are like, well, I put in so much effort. Why doesn't anybody else? And love is a very taxing emotion. It's hard to pour your all into somebody and then just be ready to do it all over again. But that's why I think it's really important to stop consuming so much horror stories on social media. Stop consuming so much content where it's just all about bashing somebody of the other gender, because that, you may not realize how much it's getting into your head and it's really messing with the way that you perceive just people in general, but it really does. When I stopped listening to those stories, that burnout really went away for me. I still took long breaks and I still never rushed into relationships, because that's another thing. I think people either just get so burnt out and then just don't want to give anybody a chance anymore, or you have the serial dating problem. And then when you have a serial dating problem, I feel like there's only so many people that you can fly through before you're like, okay, this is draining and it's not getting better. So I think we need to still have like high enough expectations, but our expectations still need to be realistic. Burnout comes from having no expectations and having the highest of high expectations that are not realistic. This is kind of where acknowledging why you either don't want to date or do want to date becomes helpful, because it is okay to not want a relationship. That there's nothing wrong with that. But there's also people who want a relationship, and that's okay too. So I think you just need to be very honest with yourself and willing to take accountability, because when you're willing to take that accountability and when you're willing to manage your expectations, not too high, not too low, realistic, but quality, then you kind of can cope with things not working out a lot easier than just feeling like the end of the world is here because you didn't find somebody. And you're not heartless to where like, I don't even care to establish any kind of connection with people. So I think that keeps you at a healthy middle ground. I personally have the tendency to have extremely high expectations. I have a projection problem. It's something that I'm really working on, but like that was my issue. I would project really heavily onto my partners, and I was such a hopeless romantic that when something didn't work out, I was like, oh my God, like the world is crumbling. I put in so much effort, and then I would stay single forever because I was like, nobody is gonna make me feel happy again. But that happiness really kind of started to be fulfilled by my own self, and then I feel like I was able to adopt a much more healthy relationship with the idea of being in a relationship, because I wasn't terrified of them anymore. I wasn't terrified of walking into something and then like getting my heart broken, but I also was not desperate for one. I was very just like neutral, you know? I feel like indifference is key, and once you're indifferent, good things will just kind of fall into your lap. I started reading the Stoicism book. I'm not gonna lie, I don't remember what it's called. I'm gonna put some text up here once I find it, but it was a book that basically was teaching you to detach from reality and realizing that you don't have full control over things that happen in real life, and that's okay. And when I realized I can let a lot of this control freakness in me when it comes to people go, because I can't fully control what somebody's going to do. I can only control what I am willing to allow. I can control what I am willing to see in somebody, but I cannot control their actions directly. I can indirectly control the way somebody treats me, but that's, sometimes it's not enough. You can do everything right and somebody could still suck. So when I realized, okay, all I need to do is kind of detach, realize that I can only control so much, I started to get over this insane fear, and I no longer had that burnout and that fatigue over something that may happen in my life and may not. Once I started to think, I'm okay if this does not come into my life, but I'm also willing to accept it if it does, things really just fell into place. I became so much happier. I was no longer listening to horror stories online. I was no longer thinking that the entire world was against me. I was no longer comparing myself to somebody that I saw online and thinking, if this horrible thing is going to happen to her, then it's definitely going to happen to me. If she can't find something real and raw, why would I? I really stopped thinking like that. And with that simple thought, that really just impacted my overall, in general, happiness and self-relationship, because that made me start to love myself more. So I hope that helps. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much all I have to say about that. Thank you so much for watching. And yeah, take care, guys.